quick joke about the LinkedIn profile. I want to get to the point where nothing is real about me online. That is my goal. I'm slowly making steps towards that. All right, let's talk about A/B testing. We're all here to talk about, to think about, to start thinking like folks that run A/B tests. So that's the goal of this workshop. So what will we talk about at a really high level? Why we run A/B tests. The fundamentals of A/B testing.
There's a mic.
There's a mic.
Yeah. Or if that might be enough. Check.
Does that work?
It's pretty sensitive.
Okay.
It's
fine. Okay, cool.
Can you guys hear?
Yeah? Okay, cool. Once we know the fundamentals of A/B testing, then we'll get a bit more context through some case studies. Then we'll do some hands-on exercises. I'll ask you to look at your phones, look at the products that you use often every day, and then we'll actually try to see what experiments could have ran or what experiments we would have ran. And then some final takeaways, why A/B testing is the coolest step in the product development lifecycle, why I'm obsessed with A/B testing, why you should be obsessed with A/B testing. And yeah, then we'll say goodbye. All right, so real quickly, who am I? My name is Leemay. I wrote a book called Practical A/B Testing. Right now I work at Spotify. I've been there for the past 3 years or so. I work on the homepage with a wonderful team that builds the homepage. I love it. It's a great company. Prior, I worked at Etsy and Dropbox, and then I spent far too long at Comcast. I spent about 9 years there. All right, so who are you? Enough about me. Potentially future product owners, product managers, entrepreneurs, data scientists, or really anyone interested in understanding the effect of the effect of features and ideas on user, business, and product metrics. All right, let's start with the why. Maybe we'll start with the tale of two product development. Not allowed enough?
I think it's okay. I did request a mic.
Okay. No worries. No worries. It's all good. I hope you can hear me. I guess if you can't, raise your hand and I'll try to talk louder. Okay, so a tale of two product development life cycles. There are two types of companies that you will work at, I guarantee you. Companies that follow this process. So first you have the user research phase. You kind of meet with users, a small number of users, not to the extent of the number of users that would be allocated into an experiment. It's usually in the millions. So you have a handful of users. You try to understand what are some of the pain points. You maybe provide them a prototype and you say, hey, check this prototype out. Tell me what you're experiencing. Tell me how you feel when you engage with these new features. And then that user research study should then influence product requirements. Once those product requirements are defined, the engineering team builds it. There's some QA. There's usually some internal QAing or offline evaluation if it's a machine learning model. And then we A/B test. This is the best stage. This is when you understand, hey, was the idea that I came up with as a product owner, in fact, what I thought would turn out from a metrics point of view? If I said, hey, I add this new feature, will it really increase consumption? Will it really increase revenue, transactions, all of those good stuff that we love? And then you launch to all your users if the A/B test suggests so. So yeah, this is one type of company. Alternatively, there are other companies that follow this other type of process. So sometimes leadership defines a new feature, then the engineering team quickly implements it. Usually there was an email the week prior saying this feature is super urgent, it must go to production. Then you test it internally, make sure it doesn't have any major bugs. Then you launch to all your users, and then you send an email celebrating it was done. You checked off your OKRs, you checked off your goals, you can go home for the day. But there's obviously something clearly missing from this step. It's A/B testing. It's how do you understand the impact of those changes? And luckily, nobody's jaded in here, because usually when I present this slide, people are God, I experience that every day. Don't see any of those expressions, so that's good. But this is a different type of company. So in a long enough timeline, you will be at both types of companies. I guarantee you. I've been there. I've been at a company. I spent 9 years at a company that did pretty much very little A/B testing. And I spent the past 4 years at a company that does a ton of A/B testing. And it's very different experiences, especially from a product perspective. I think besides, as a product manager, I'm an engineer, but I have played product. the most fulfilling thing is understanding if the impact that you thought you'd have on your metrics actually does come to fruition. It feels good to put stuff into production. It feels good when your features are in front of millions of users, but how do you actually know the impact, the value add? That's through metrics, that's through data, right? So what should you do if you're at a company that already is A/B testing? Since we're talking about the two different types, you should run A/B tests, obviously. Take risks, take big swings, experiment, really understand the effect of your ideas. Because the more that you understand the effect of your ideas, the more likely you'll be able to, have better ideas in the future. Now let's say you're at a company that doesn't A/B test. What should you do? Be armed with the knowledge to incorporate A/B testing. Be a conduit for change, make change happen, be the change the world wants to see. The reason I say this was because this was me about 5 or 6 years ago. When I was at Comcast, I started out as an engineer, and then I eventually climbed the ladder and became engineering director. But during that time, the last 2 years, I built an A/B testing platform. I built it with 5 engineers. Like, that is not a big team. And we evaluated the For You homepage with millions of users, but if I didn't have this drive to want to understand the impact of our changes, we probably wouldn't have built an A/B testing platform with just 5 engineers. So what to take away from this is if you do one day are at a company that doesn't have A/B testing, you can implement it. It doesn't take a lot of engineering to at least start. But hopefully you're already at a company that A/B tests. Okay, so in order to do that, we should talk about why A/B testing is important. User insights, product insights, business insights. You want to understand the impact of changes on the user experience, of course. You want to measure the effect of a feature on product metrics. These are different. There are different buckets of metrics. User metrics are kind of engagement oriented. Is the user continuing to come back to your product? Product metrics are sometimes like, was a specific feature that this team built clicked on or impressed upon and it doesn't degrade with a new feature. And then business metrics are what you suspect. It's revenue, it's transactions, it's churn, it's retention. It's all the things that keep the business going. Yeah, essentially the same thing. But we'll touch upon one specific part, build more inclusive products. We all want products to work for everyone, right? We don't want to build a product for a specific type of user. We want any user that's using our product to feel like this is a good product for them. A/B testing can absolutely help with that. Let's pause for a moment and talk about that. Does anyone have a sense of what it means for A/B testing to enable more inclusive products? I have the answer, so it's okay. Go for it.
If you change like the type of verbiage on a certain page, you can see that increases engagement.
And how do you think that, do you think that there's a way to measure that for specific user cohorts?
Yeah, so if you like bucket certain users by demographics or
exactly.
They click on to like the next page.
And if there's like a skew for like one group of users or another. Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So it means this data visualization. This is a fake graph, but it's very similar to what I see every day. Look at demographics, age buckets, 15 to 25, 26 to 40, 40 to 60, 61 and over. These are different engagement metrics for those different buckets. A/B testing can get you this data, and this is actually where you want to go when you're building a product. You want to understand the impact on specific user groups, not just the average or the most prominent user group. Or A/B testing can be used to prevent situations like this. So back in 2022, Twitter, if you were on Twitter, you may have seen this come about. There was a bunch of social media users of the platform that noticed that there was potential algorithmic bias that did not serve all people equitably. Users observed race bias when the image included multiple races. So if you can see, obviously someone tweeted that they were running an A/B test to fix that, which is good. Like that's what we want. We want accountability when we build products. But at a really high level, what that meant is if there were a handful of individuals in the photo, their image cropping algorithm would crop the photo such that the individual with lighter skin was in the preview. And what does that mean? So that means you're not getting a fair representation of what the image presented to the users. That also means that you're excluding a handful of users from being exposed on the timeline. That also means that you're if you want to see the full image, if you want to see how everyone was represented, you have to take like 5 clicks to go view that. And this is not good. And this could have totally been prevented if they evaluated their algorithm that did the cropping with an A/B test. And then they did the similar bucket, not at the age level, but at the demographic level, to understand like what was happening when they evaluated the images that were presented. So there are different ways to look at A/B test results. Sometimes you look at the content that was presented. Sometimes you look at the metrics, like from the user's perspective. For this case, it would have been amazing if before they launched this feature, they actually looked at the images that were cropped by their algorithm and understood what's different about these images. All right, so A/B testing can help in these cases, which is great. So let's talk about the fundamentals of A/B testing before we get into a little bit of hands-on, try to come up with some A/B tests that we would configure if we were product owners of the apps that we use every day. So let's talk about the most important design pieces. There's a lot that goes into A/B testing, and hopefully the platform or the engineering or the tech behind it kind of obfuscates the majority of what you need to know. But these are the pieces that you can't go without. You need a hypothesis, you need a test and control, and then you need metrics. And of course, you need all these statistical concepts like how long the duration should be so that could be statistically significant, what the p-value is, what the sample size. We're not going to talk about that because hopefully you have a data scientist that will help you, or your engineering platform, again, figures that out for you behind the scenes. Okay, hypothesis. I mean, we learned about this in like 3rd grade. We kind of know what that is. It expresses what the A/B test seeks to evaluate. These are really important because once you work at a large enough company, people will be questioning why you're running this A/B test. They'll be questioning like, what's the impact? What's the effect? I don't think you should run that. I think you should run this other one. Space is a limitation. You can only run so many A/B tests at once. And at some point, you're going to be asked to advocate for your test over another test. Your hypothesis makes a big difference in here. If it's very clear what you're trying to evaluate with simple words, you can get buy-in. And here's some examples. So we believe by incorporating contextual data that suggests why a user's recommended content, they're more likely to engage and therefore increase consumption on the product. This is very generic. It could be applied to literally any product. Spotify. We believe if we tell you why you're being presented these recommendations, you will then be more likely to consume them, right? Netflix, go for it.
When you're designing this hypothesis, how do you know which variable, not variable to select on, and how do you know that there aren't like confounding factors that's already there? So for example, if I claim that by adjusting the font size of my checkout page, I will get higher transaction like pass-through, how do I know that that's also not based on the placement of the button or something?
Yeah, absolutely. That's like what you have to, well, first you have to have some product intuition. Second, there are ways where you can have multiple test variants. So you can place that font in different locations, and then you can kind of decide, okay, because like it's multivariable testing. So you're like changing multiple things. Ideally, you only change one thing though. That's a really, really good point. Okay, yeah, and then the next one, if we make it easier to purchase items on the product by decreasing the purchase workflow, we'll increase the transaction rate. This is similar to my time at Etsy. At Etsy, there's a lot of buttons you have to click to buy something. There was at one point. And there was a big push to make that super seamless, which, then hopefully increased transactions. I don't know if it did. All right, so now we're going to talk about test and control treatments. Also, if there are any other questions, feel free to raise your hand. This at a really high level, it's how you're sampling users. You're taking it from the larger pool of users that are already on your product. You're randomly selecting a handful, be more than a handful, but a certain amount for the test and then a certain amount from the control. The users in the test treatment obviously get the change that you're evaluating. The users in the control get the unchanged experience, get the experience that everyone else that's not in your A/B test get as well. Okay, success metrics. This is fun. I love talking about metrics for a bunch of reasons. One, most of the time you don't have the perfect metric, so you have to be flexible in how you'll evaluate your test. I can tell you from my time at Comcast, when we launched the For You homepage on the video product, we didn't have impressions, which is wild because it's like, how do you know if someone saw it? Like, it was, and I couldn't wait until we had impressions, because by the time we would have had impressions, it would have been like 3 years later and I wouldn't have been at the company. So instead we use proxy metrics. We use other types of metrics. We had clicks, we had streams, we had a high level sense of revenue that could be correlated to a set of users. And you'll just have to get flexible. So you'll see metrics is probably the hardest part. I remember I worked with a really smart ML guy at Spotify a few years ago, and he said the hardest thing that we do is pick the right metric. And then after that, the hardest thing we do is make a decision based on the test results. Because sometimes test results come back inconclusive, and sometimes your intuition feels stronger than it is, and you still launch it. So yeah, metrics. Okay, so success metrics, this is how you identify if you can launch. This is like the most important metric. This is the one that you want to move. Then there's also guardrail metrics. Guardrail metrics are incredibly important. They're sometimes called secondary metrics, but these are the metrics that you include in your A/B test because you don't want to do harm to them. So for example, the For You homepage that we launched at Comcast, the guardrail metrics were live consumption, like linear consumption, because I was launching a feature on the on-demand experience. Another guardrail metric that's pretty common is retention or monthly active users, or some of the metrics that companies read out at their quarterly earning reports. We don't want to harm those with an incremental feature. Yeah, here's some examples. Your tests will have multiple configured. So you'll usually have like a handful of success metrics and then the company standard for the guardrail metrics. So what's important is the reason why you have a few metrics that you configure in your test and not just one is because there are trade-offs. Sometimes with the change, new feature, you're increasing one metric, like weekly active users. More users are engaging with your app or your product on a weekly basis. But then another metric like transactions may decrease. And you have to make a decision, is that trade-off worth it? Which is why you have both the guardrail metrics and the success metrics. Okay, so let's visualize exactly what trade-offs look like in the real world. That's what it looks like. You'll have happy user metrics, and then you'll have super sad business metrics. A really good example of this is the flip of that, which is ads, advertisements. Almost every product has an ad on there, and usually that's at the cost of the user experience. I mean, it's not optimal to be, exposed to a banner ad, but it is increasing some business-oriented metric at potentially the cost of fewer clicks or fewer streams. So that's what trade-offs look like. Here's another example. You'll get these two different graphs out of your A/B test. You'll have one graph, which is weekly active users, and you'll have another that's transactions. Your weekly active users increase, notably, and then your transactions, nothing really changes. But if transactions is what you were trying to optimize towards as a success metric, you may decide not to launch this test because you're like, my intent wasn't to increase weekly active users. Although great, but you maybe have to go back to the drawing board if the goal is to increase transactions. And that's why it's important to measure a handful of metrics and not just one or two. Okay, A/B testing design aside, in practice, what do you really need to run experiments? You need all these three things. I'll touch on them real quickly. Process, technology, and culture. You need the right process. If it's really hard to configure your A/B test, you're not going to want to do it. This is something that we're really good at Spotify. We have a really slick process. What that means is we have people helping with ensuring that the test is configured correctly. We have data scientists ensuring that while the test is running, there's no harm done unexpectedly by monitoring the test. And there's, of course, technology. That's the engineering platform to facilitate A/B testing on your product. And then there's the right culture. Do people care about A/B testing? Do people just want to ship features to production and not measure the impact? If that's the case, it's unlikely the company will really embrace A/B testing. Yeah, the trifecta is pretty graph. All right, let's jump into case studies before we get into the hands-on part. Microsoft. This is a pretty popular A/B test. For Microsoft search engine Bing, there in 2012, there was an engineer that added like a quick change to the display of ads on their search engine. And then instead of simply pushing it to prod, they ran an A/B test, and with ours, they realized that there was like a 12% increase in revenue from that small change. And that's the point of A/B testing. You want to be measuring these type of changes, but also bigger changes, which we'll talk about next. Yeah, small changes can have a big impact. Knowing what changes influence key metrics lend itself to further improvement. So once you know that this small change got you a 12% bump, you can make more smaller changes like that. Let's make it easy when we can, right? And you can only replicate what you measure. All right, so the next one is Netflix. This is a really popular A/B test as well. Everyone knows that when you engage with Netflix, you're probably guaranteed to be in an A/B test. And once you start thinking about A/B tests every day, like I do, you'll start to wish you weren't in A/B tests. There's often a way of I'm engaging on Netflix and I'm like, I know I'm in an A/B test because this feature is new and I don't like it. Or this feature is great and I hope it gets shipped to production. But they have a pretty sophisticated image selection strategy. They are known for this. Lots of companies want to copy them because of this. Lots of companies can't because it's kind of hard. But they did A/B test it, which is cool. So at a really high level, here's the control and the two test variants. So they were testing two different types of images. And they were comparing the default artwork to the two test variants to understand if we change the image, would that impact user metrics? Would users be more likely to consume that specific type of content, right? And it makes sense. I mean, we usually pick things based on how they visually look. So this is a great use of both ML or both. It's probably a heuristic that's doing the image creation, and then of course A/B testing. Here's another example. Notice the different variations of the same TV show, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. It's presented with varying title, design, facial expressions of the main characters, different colors, and they evaluated these different images and what was the impact from a user perspective. All right, so let's kind of walk through this and create a hypothesis, success metrics, and guardrail metrics. So let's pretend we're at Netflix. Perhaps the hypothesis would be if we present users with artwork that include recognizable characters and pronounced titles, then we will help users find and enjoy titles faster, therefore increasing engagement. That's probably what the hypothesis sounded like. And then the metrics, click-through rate, aggregate play duration, fraction of plays with short duration. Why do you want to measure a fraction of plays with short duration? Because you want to understand if it was like clickbait. Did someone click in it and then quickly end it? So that's important. It's not just about like the initial engagement, but the engagement towards the end of the movie. And then guardrail metrics, retention, and impressions. You don't want to be introducing these new images and then users unsubscribe, right? All right, those were our case studies. Now we will design our own tests. So let's see how this goes. So the goal of this exercise is to create practical demonstrations using the fundamental A/B testing concepts. So let's pretend we're product managers of the apps that we love and enjoy every day and start, picking away at it. So if we could pull out our phones, please, and open up your most used apps. It could be Spotify. I can talk about Spotify. I don't want to hear about Apple. Just kidding. Does anyone want to name one of the apps that they engage with the most? Okay, Spotify. So if you go to the homepage, because that I'm very familiar with, what do you think, when you look at the homepage, what do you think was an A/B test we could have potentially ran?
Whether you would want to have the primary podcast or list that you listen to be at the top of the screen for you to go back to.
That is very likely. Yep, podcast consumption does matter for the company. It's definitely an investment, right, that they're making in the podcast creators, and also it's a bet, right? The company was initially music oriented, and at some point it switched to podcasts, and now it's also serving audiobooks. So they want to see if proliferating their podcast recommendations at the top would increase engagement for those podcasts or make it easier for them to find, perhaps. So yeah, that's a good one. What was do you know what row that was called out of curiosity? Like, what was that podcast?
Oh no, it's just like when I go to the top, it points me to whatever
Oh,
I'm listening to.
Yeah. So that's like your familiar recommendations. Yeah, totally. That is heavily A/B tested. That's a favorite. Anything else? Go for it.
When I scroll like all the way down to the bottom, there's like a video.
Yeah, that's a new feature.
So maybe like
That's-
when I click on it, it's a motion.
That's definitely been A/B tested. Yep, that's a totally new engagement experience. Very different than the recommendations that she just talked about. What do you think is the guardrail metric for a new feature like that? 'Cause that's hard.
That we like lower our listening hours.
Yes, that's a good one. Yeah. If we're introducing this totally new way of presenting recommendations, we don't want listening hours to decrease. That's a bad thing. Yeah. No, totally. That's any other? Go for it.
Search has changed. I don't know if it's and guard rates. I'm not sure if the time spent on the app.
Yes, like a session, definitely. Sessions are big metrics. It's like how much time is spent on the app or how long it takes to get from opening the app to playing your first piece of content. That is definitely measured. And yeah, search is definitely evaluated. From the search perspective, there's like two angles. There's like how it's presented and then the relevancy algorithm. So when you type in like Drake, you type in DRA, how high up is Drake in the response? So that's like an example of an A/B test.
I guess the enhanced feature for music is kind of recent, the past few months. So
Yep.
that could be highly A/B tested.
Definitely. What are the different ways to A/B test that? It's a hard question.
I guess it could be like you talked about, like the fraction of time spent per song. So if they liked it, they would say for more than, let's say, a minute.
Yeah. Totally. And another example, so that's like from the consumption perspective, which is a good one, because that's the intent of that feature is like it's adding songs that weren't originally in the playlist, but based on your user listening habits. Another way is like, how do you even discover that feature? Like, is potentially they A/B tested notifications or putting enhanced buttons somewhere like up higher in the options. Yeah. Any like non-Spotify ones? I love talking about Netflix. Well, we're going to talk about Netflix, so maybe not. I'll just get into that one. All right, we talked about what feature you think was A/B tested, what change to the product likely lent itself towards. This is how you'll become a really good product owner if that's the future you would like to pursue, is using these products and really thinking what was evaluated in the scope of an A/B test and what was it. I can name a bunch of products that I use every day where it's such a jarring experience. I know there was no A/B test. Like it couldn't have been an A/B test. And then I know the experience as well. I was like, wow, this was such a seamless experience. Like this was either built with the best product intuition or evaluated in some extent either through an A/B test or user research. There are other ways to evaluate changes to the product. But A/B testing gets you the most information with ideally the least amount of work. User research studies do take a lot of work. Okay, let's walk through a Netflix and Etsy example. All right, this was on my Netflix experience this morning. Yeah, there's a big image. Get Gotti. I'm probably not going to watch that. Let's walk through the Netflix product. Pick a feature on, like, just pick anything on this screenshot, and let's create a hypothesis. There's so much.
The tabs at the top.
Yes, that was what I was hoping someone would pick. The tabs, because we have the same tabs we have the same chips or chiclets or whatever you like to call them. Yeah, TV shows, movies, and categories. That was absolute. There's no way Netflix didn't A/B test that. So what do you think was a hypothesis for that, introducing that type of feature? Go ahead.
That TV shows and movies are the most popular categories, so show those first. That way there's easy access.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's what I was going to say Spotify. That's what Netflix is known for, TV shows and movies. So do you think it was if we introduce filter options or chips, whatever they call that, then we will, if we present TV shows and movies as filter options above the homepage, then users will
Easily access the content
that they specifically want versus browsing for the TV show and movies on their homepage. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, no, that makes sense because sometimes that makes sense. When you're using a product, you usually have like an intent in mind. Usually you go and you're like, I want to listen to music or I want to listen to a podcast or I'm in the mood for a TV show. And sometimes it's more browsing. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm just in the mood for something. And so maybe they were orienting those new features for the former set of users that are just like, I know kind of what I want, help me get there. And then what do you think would be like a success metric for that feature? Go for it.
The time for somebody to start engaging or watching a show.
Yeah, like a session to like a start show session or something like that. Definitely. And then maybe just also they were measuring like how many people actually click on it. Like, is it even in a good location? Is it too much at the top? Should it be better like placed underneath the big promo for Get Gotti? They probably experimented with the location of that feature as well. And then guardrail metrics. This one's hard. Do you have any ideas for what a guardrail metric? A metric we don't want to harm by introducing this feature. Actually, this wasn't that hard. If you know Netflix well, they care most about subscriptions. So maybe subscriptions was one of them. Or maybe a guardrail metric was decreasing. They wouldn't want to decrease consumption, right? All right, let's get out of Netflix. Let's go into Etsy. Oh, go ahead.
Question.
Yeah.
Would it require like two different A/B tests to test like one whether we should show these tabs and then two like where those tabs are, or would that be in one A/B test?
No, it's a really good. It depends on. It depends. Like you could configure it to be one A/B test, but it would be different test variants. So instead of it being an A/B, it'd be an A, B, C, D. But it just you have to make sure that the same things are changed. It's like I think if you move the TV shows and movies lower, don't change and say like what's some other type of content they serve. I don't know, games and movies or something. Like make sure you know what you're trying to understand. Like if you're trying to understand the location, that's a different type of hypothesis than like the options that you're returning. Like is TV show and movies the right content type? If that makes sense. Go ahead.
The example that you gave before with 6 different image types for any movie, if you see that in the A/B test, one image receives more response and engaging geographically versus the other. So how do you then on that result?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. How do you act on these results? That's like the age-old question. It's like now I have all this data. So the thing with A/B testing is it tells you like what happened, but it doesn't tell you why that happened. You have to do like any data scientist will tell you that line. Like they will repeat that to you over and over again because those are the type of questions that people ask once they've gotten the results. And to understand, the first thing is you kind of understand why a specific region had a higher engagement with a specific image versus another one. That's like step one. Step two is maybe this feature lends itself to localization. So maybe this feature should have different experiences based on the locality. And that's pretty common. There are companies that have different algorithms that train on different data based on the locality. And then there are companies that, like I imagine Netflix says, I'm pretty sure that their image selection varies depending on location.
So just to follow on that question, how would you think about the test and inputs in that situation?
Yeah, so for another really good question, there's a strategy called stratified random sampling where you want to, so there's two things. There's either random sampling or stratified random sampling where it's, you want to make sure that your A/B test user groups have enough users from all of the locations that you care about, so that you can get those insights. If you don't care about that, then you can just do random sampling, if that makes sense. So your test group, it should have enough users where you can say with confidence from a statistics point of view, like, okay, I can make a decision because Germany's engagement was like this because there was enough German users. So yeah, you still have an A/B test. It's just making sure the users were properly represented from those key attributes. And another angle to look at it is, this is actually a really good product question, is like, what type of user attributes do we care about? So we care about location because we may change the user experience based on location. We care about device type, like that video example with Spotify. How would that video present on a really old Android device that has really low bandwidth? Like, would the video even appear? Like, you want to make sure that your A/B test has those type of users so you can really understand the impact, and not just for like iPhone users or something.
How do you decide the split between the test and the control group? Like, is it always 50-50 or are there instances?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it depends on the exposure. So, for example, the testing the recommendation that's at the top of the Spotify homepage, that gets a lot of exposure. Like, you don't need 50% of the user population to get some statistical understanding if the change was effective. But if you're measuring something that's like all the way at the bottom or like in some gray land of the area that nobody sees, you're probably going to need more users because it's unlikely users will see it. So it also depends on your allocation strategy for your A/B test. So there's like two ways. There's one where a user's inserted into a test because something happened, because they saw the homepage. So they're like, oh, you saw the homepage, now you're included in this test. Or there's like batch allocation, which is more for the A/B testing platforms that are in their infancy. This is what we had at Comcast, where we said we want daily active users, so users that use the product daily that have watched something on demand the past month. Like, that's how we decided what our criteria was for the user to be in the group, because we were like, they use the product, done. And then two, they use the part of the product that we evaluate, which is on demand. But the number 50, I think you'd have to rely on your data scientists to understand like the sample size calculations and what's enough to get that statistical understanding of like, this result is something you can trust and it's not just by chance.
So I imagine that some experiments might have immediate consequences, but also second and third order consequences.
Yeah.
Maybe a negative. So how do you track those? Do you run the experiment longer? Do you track it in the background?
Yeah. So you're talking about, there's a notion called degradation tests and long-term holdbacks. So let's say the key success metric was consumption, and we increase that. But there is a chance that at the cost of consumption, we may hurt revenue because the consumption's free content. And there's also purchasing content that you can buy. And so what we would do is we potentially launch the feature, but we would hold back users. So we would hold back like 1 million users, I made that number up, and not give them the feature. And so what we would do is then they wouldn't get the feature for like 6 months, and then we would say for that group of users, the holdback group, did anything happen? Like, did their revenue increase compared to the user group that got the new feature? Like, there are ways to get longer term understanding by still using the concept of an A/B test, but it's like at a way larger scale. And same thing with degradation. A degradation test is the same thing, where it's the same thing as a holdback. You remove a feature, and you kind of measure at a longer term scale what was the impact to those metrics that potentially had harm at the beginning. But sometimes it goes away. You know what I mean? Sometimes there's like an initial reaction, and then it comes back. There's a term for that. It's it's not interaction effect, novelty effect. Like, sometimes there's an impression at the beginning, but then at a long enough timeline, users get acquainted with the feature. Anything else? went to Etsy. It's a two-sided marketplace, which is super interesting from a product point of view. Okay, so Etsy is a two-sided marketplace in that it serves buyers and it serves sellers, right? So sellers put their crafts on the product and then buyers purchase that product. So there's like so much to do from an experimentation point of view. There's so many cool metrics to play with. Looking at this view, can we think of what a hypothesis would look like if we picked a feature? Well, first let's pick a feature. Sorry if it's small.
Recent finds.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, if you, all products have this notion of like what you're familiar with. This is just my stuff. Yeah, how do you think what type of A/B test do you think they would run on your recent
Probably
finds?
position in the home screen.
Absolutely.
How many scores do you want to have before you reach the, and it feels like that's the first thing you want to do that time.
Yeah.
So maybe it is.
Yeah, no, location's a huge one for this one. If any product, they have your recent finds. TV, continue watching, Spotify, that top row that's under good morning or good afternoon. Every product has that row, and every product is playing on where to put it. And there's like two different concepts from a product perspective. There's one, if I put it right in front of you, like quick, that's great. You're giving the user what they want. There's also this notion that I don't like, but a lot of companies do. They call it the milk at the back of the grocery store, where they put the milk all the way at the back of the grocery store because you know you're going to buy milk. Sometimes that row is like it's like few down. And I'm sure that's been A/B tested. Yeah, it's a good example. Any other ones? Go ahead.
I guess the camera on the top right is whether you want to search or like take a picture of something to find a similar item.
Definitely. I think that's been definitely A/B tested. The interesting with that is how do you get users to try that? Like I see that and I get nervous. I'm going to like upload an image from my camera roll or something. So the size of the group is hard to identify for that.
You could change the, like, instead of search for anything on Etsy, you could like explicitly write that you can use.
Right, change the text so it's like way clear what the intent of that feature is. Yeah, that's likely been an A/B test. Is like what's the text that accompanies that feature. Definitely. Go ahead.
The notification
Yes.
to use picked for you.
That is a huge use case for A/B testing. Every company has a team that's the notifications team, and that is the hardest team to be on. I highly recommend don't joining that team because it's so hard to understand like the value. Because like if you see a notification, yeah, you may have clicked on it or it may have been really annoying. And if you don't have A/B testing, how are you going to prove that notifications are actually helpful? Yeah. And then the other aspect is like, what if I engage with that notification? Like, what's the feedback loop? Like, what do I get as a user? Like, often users are like hesitant to even touch notifications. So that is a prime example of A/B testing. I was an engineer on the notifications team, so it was awful at Comcast. Anything else that we'd want to test? I like to know if that's my favorite examples, notifications. That's about it. I mean, everything could be tested, even the options below, home, favorites, updates, view, cart, all that good stuff. What do you think are metrics that are important? And we'll move on to Etsy, but what do you think are important Etsy metrics? Transactions, click-through rate, favorites probably. I don't know how often that's used, but that's another metric. All right, so we're nearing the end of this workshop. I'll highlight real quick different types of A/B tests. Not all tests are the same. There are different types of A/B tests, just like apples. You really want to understand, do you need to measure if the change is equal to the control experience? Or do you want to measure if the change is almost as good or marginally worse than the control? There are absolutely features that you will launch to production that the intent is not to increase the metric, but rather like make sure you didn't do harm. So these are 3 different types of tests: superiority test, non-inferiority, and equivalence tests. superiority. This is the one that we always think of when we think of A/B testing. This is like we want the feature to be superior to the control. This is all the examples we talked about today. Non-inferior test. This is a type of test that also gets run often because you need to meet some business use case that has to go to production. So say like you're building a product and part of the product is a new content. It's audiobooks or something. You have to launch audiobooks. You can't stop from launching audiobooks. But you want to measure that you're not doing harm. So sometimes you're like, okay, I'll do a non-inferiority test. This feature will go to production as long as these metrics aren't harmed for some given margin. There's a bunch of good use cases for non-inferior and equivalence. Equivalence is the name. You want it to be equal to the control, essentially. Those two are really good for system changes, like for engineering architecture changes that are more behind the scenes. You kind of run an A/B test to ensure you don't do harm, but you have to push it out to prod because the architecture is needed for whatever feature in the future, or it's an optimization or cost-cutting system or something like that. Okay, final takeaways. Success of any product and engineering strategy relies heavily on making the right decisions. That is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to make right decisions. How do you make right decisions? Well, you use A/B testing to help you understand if it's right. You can't be expected. I mean, we have intuitions. I've built features that I've desperately believed in. When I was at Comcast launching the For You page, I was both the engineering director and the product director, which is the best position to be in because no one's telling you like what you can or can't do. But I believed so much in this For You homepage. Like all I wanted was for that to go to production. But you know what? The A/B test suggested the initial metrics weren't good. Like we did not increase consumption as we thought we were going to, so we had to iterate and improve it. So use A/B testing to help make sure that you're building the right product for your users. Companies that leverage A/B testing in one way or another, they're doing it as a conduit for innovation. Like if you really want to innovate, A/B testing can help. High level innovation, strategy, learning. A/B testing can do all of these things for you. Innovating ML, everyone talks about ML, AI. The next talk is going to be about ML and AI. You know what ML and AI can't do without? A/B testing. You can't evaluate a model in production without an A/B test. They rely heavily on offline metrics. Offline metrics in theory can only take you so far. You need to see how the user engages with it. I love it when people talk about ML and they don't talk about A/B testing because it's like it's a big picture that's missing. Strategy. Obviously, I'm biased. I have an obsession with A/B testing, but still, strategy. Everyone has a product strategy. Product people love their strategy docs and their vision docs, as do I as well, because it feeds our engineering roadmap. How do you ensure your strategy is right? With A/B testing. And then naturally learning. You learn. You learn what works. You learn what doesn't work. It's saying all the same things. The only thing I didn't talk about is de-risking and reducing the cost of innovation. The thing that happens a lot is people are fearful to push big changes to prod. Why did it take 9 years to launch a For You homepage on the Comcast video product that I talk about often and that I have such affinity for because it was one of the best experiences because people didn't know how personalization would perform on the product. We didn't know if it would be too slow, if it would, take away consumption from other key areas of the product. And a way to de-risk those fears is with A/B testing. There are many techniques. There's offline evaluation, user research, interleaved experience, overlapping tests, A/B tests. A/B test is just one of those ways you can get insights. Additional resources, my book, check it out. Feedback. And I think that's it.